Oh, she's got it. She's got it already. Do you want to know whether maybe?
Yeah.
Afraid it might be possible that you have an earlier version of it. I just wanted to double make sure.
Okay, send her. Have you got Afrin's email address? Yeah, you do. She sent you the link.
Yeah, I sent it on the chat as well. I think we already have attendees coming in.
Okay.
We have 2 minutes to go.
Can you go through to a Google account, Afreen?
I have a Google account as well. I'll send you.
I'm sending you the link. It's on its way to you now.
Okay, so we have Rohan.
Oh, we do. Great. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Claire. How are you?
Good. So, everybody, this is Rowan Mcmahon, Larry Moore, Afrin, and Jayesh. This is Rowan.
Rowan, pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you all.
We will be starting in a minute as I check our slides as well, Larry. Maybe you can start and I'll try to.
Yeah, well, Larry's third speaker, so there's a bit of time.
Yeah. It's 12 noon Bangkok. We'll just wait for a minute more for colleagues to join in, and we'll start in a minute.
Okay. Jayesh, you got the outline, you know the format for the workshop? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And so you're the second speaker, and I'll introduce you and then just hand over to you.
Sure.
Sounds good.
All right, I think we can start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining. Welcome to the second learning session on our Data for Policy platform, where we are trying to engage with the country offices as well as policymakers that you're working with on different challenges, the policy challenges that they're facing, plus the ones who are really keen to prototype on data-driven policy making together with us. So it's all about learning, sharing, cross-fertilizing policy ideas, actions with each other. I am so happy to introduce you once again to Claire Curran, who's the ex-digital minister, our expert on panel. Who would be taking lead from here. But I just wanted to set the context by saying all of you have registered, so you know that the background speaks of how we want to engage with policymakers in our region and connect them with experts and policymakers from across the globe to share their experiences on various policy challenges that they're facing, as well as experiment on some of those. So please feel free to reach out to me or Alex if you're interested in having a more deeper engagement with us on data-driven policies, on how your digital transformation journeys would look like. We have been, having a good portfolio of digital transformation as well as data for policy at the Regional Innovation Center. Some of you have been a part of it. Some of you have been observers because there are mailers that have been going, but we really, really look forward to an engaging and learning session today. Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Afrin. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Welcome, everyone. It's a great privilege to be facilitating this webinar, and thank you so much to UNDP for the important opportunity. Before I set the context for the session, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Claire Curran. I was a Cabinet Minister in the New Zealand government in 2017 and 18, and a long-time politician. I was responsible for the development of policy inside government to stimulate digital innovation with a common set of standards and services across government, digital inclusion for all New Zealanders, and an emphasis on stimulating and expanding the digital economy. Now retired from politics, I'm deeply interested in the nature of organisations, networks, and collaboration that supports effective and accountable government and a just and inclusive society. We've got some great speakers today, and this will be an informative and thought-provoking discussion focusing on how bridging the digital divide has become an urgent public policy issue and what can be done about it. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated a global shift, which has seen people turning to digital communication to replace in-person interactions, but not everyone has been able to do this. Instead, digital inequality has deepened in the pandemic world, and the impacts are still to be measured fully, but they include more children out of school for prolonged periods, large populations struggling to access government services and online shopping, and even access to trustworthy information, people unable to work from home, and less support for vulnerable communities. The social and economic effects of these disruptions are significant, and the work required to address them is urgent, important, and complex. The most vulnerable include older people, less educated people, people with physical health problems, low literacy levels or low levels of internet skills, and low levels of trust in authority. Perhaps one of the most significantly affected groups are young people who have no or limited access to the internet or a device at home, whose education has been seriously disrupted for more than 2 years. The effects include the possibility that a generation of children miss out on key schooling, compromising their ability to access tertiary training. Disrupted tertiary qualifications affects the skilled workforce. Also, social services are disrupted with long-term effects on the health system and social cohesiveness. Studies have found that people who are already relatively advantaged in their access to the internet and skill levels are more likely to use the information and communication opportunities provided by the internet to their benefit in the health pandemic, while less advantaged people are less likely to benefit. Thus the COVID-19 crisis is enforcing and worsening existing inequalities. So if you're urban-based, able to access the internet and digitally literate, you're far less likely to be disadvantaged. Vulnerable populations, those living in more remote areas with limited or no access to the internet or devices, with poor digital literacy, and those who have limited means of affording connectivity are deeply disadvantaged by the societal restrictions brought about by the pandemic. Working from home arrangements, remote learning, telemedicine, and other novel forms of service delivery have accelerated throughout the world throughout the pandemic, but the adoption rate of these technologies favours more developed countries, which threatens to widen the digital divide, particularly in Asia. While the market will eventually deliver digital transformation to the vast majority of populations, even those in more remote areas or facing significant barriers to uptake and access, social and economic disruption wrought by a global pandemic has heightened and deepened structural inequalities. So there's a social and economic imperative for governments to work quickly and with agility to address the divides and to learn and adapt measures from others who have and are facing similar issues. So now to our speakers. Three speakers, and then they will all be available in a panel discussion to answer questions. And we really want this to be an interactive session. So you're taking time out from your busy lives, so we want to make it more useful for you. Please place questions and comments in the chat or the Q&A function during the presentations, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So our first speaker is Rowan Mcmahon. Rowan has spent over 25 years in commercial and not-for-profit fields with deep expertise in strategy, technology, reputation, and sustainability. His experience includes management consulting, corporate roles, and leading a startup. After moving to New Zealand in 2010, he became a strategy director at Crown Fibre Holdings, the New Zealand government's broadband investment agency. In 2017, he formed Walimi Consulting, which provides strategic planning, commercial due diligence, digital technology, and sustainability advice to a variety of clients. In 2020, he took up the role as a founding partner at the Climate Venture Capital Fund, a new fund aiming to provide capital towards firms which are developing low emissions technologies to accelerate emissions reductions and help mitigate climate change. Rowan has a long-standing interest in digital equity. He served on the government's Digital Inclusion and Digital Equity Ministerial Advisory Group and is currently a member of the establishment group of the Digital Equity Coalition Aotearoa. He chairs the Auckland Social Services Agency LifeWise and is director of the Auckland Street Choir, both of which engage heavily with communities which have low levels of connectivity and digital engagement. Rowan holds bachelor's degrees in economics and law from the University of Sydney. So over to you, Rowan.
Thank you very much, Claire, and tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's great to be with you this evening. And I'd just like to, perhaps coming from New Zealand, present a short overview of the digital equity landscape as we see it here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I hope you can see my slides in front of you, and I'll talk briefly because, as Claire said, I'd like to agree with that, be very keen to get to the questions and answers and to make the session as interactive as possible. But given Claire is speaking from New Zealand, and so am I, and so is Larry, perhaps a little bit of an overview from New Zealand might be appropriate. So what does the digital equity landscape look like here in New Zealand? Well, on the whole, we're a relatively well-connected country. We have a lot of people using fibre connections, most of which are at the speeds of 100 megabits per second or above. We're enthusiastic users of digital technology. We love our Netflix and our YouTube and our cloud computing. We don't have poor connectivity on the whole. In fact, we're currently ranked 14th in the world for internet speeds for broadband and a little bit lower on mobile connections with an average of 47 megabits per second, or 35th in the world. So those are respectable levels of connectivity. We find that the retail broadband market is very competitive thanks to some moves that the government, with Claire's help, sponsored in the last decade around the ultra-fast broadband scheme. Whereas the mobile market is somewhat less competitive, has got involved extensively in broadband in the last few years and has funded the ultra-fast broadband program, the rural broadband program, and is now connecting marae, which are an important cultural resource for our Maori Indigenous community here in New Zealand. So on the whole, New Zealand is quite well connected. Sadly, though, a lot of people are left out of that connected realm, maybe as many as 1 in every 5 households do not have internet access at home, and about 6% of New Zealanders aged 16 or above do not use the internet. Interestingly, as Claire said, many of those people would be Maori or Pacifica. Many are rural New Zealanders living in rural areas, or those who may be older, or those on low incomes, or those in unstable housing, such as those who are homeless. So it's a challenging area to try to reach those people and to try to help them to unlock the benefits of connectivity. But the problem of disconnection in our community is not particularly well understood. The National Census in 2018 used a digital first model where census surveys were to be completed digitally first, and there were not paper-based census surveys available for many people. And what that resulted was that there were many people who might be considered marginalized who were simply not counted in the census. What that means now is that we have a lack of good data on the extent of digital inclusion or the extent of digital exclusion in New Zealand. And that affects our ability to make good decisions for those communities. Of course, shortly after the census, we started to see the first of the COVID-19 responses. And for those who were able to use connectivity in that period of time, you saw a sharp increase in data usage as people were working from home using Zoom and cloud computing. You saw the same effect in 2021, where we had another lockdown, certainly in Auckland, which is New Zealand's largest city. And those pandemic impacts would have been seen in other countries, I'm sure. I'm sure Larry will talk more about the education sector, in which he's much more expert than I am, but it's worth noting that there were emergency responses needed from government in many sectors of the economy. And in the education sector, that's certainly one example where the government, through the Ministry of Education, funded many thousands of household devices for households that did not have the internet at home, but had school-aged children. But what the ministry has said, the Ministry of Education said, is that they struggled to identify which households didn't have connectivity. They then found that they had logistics issues in providing devices in a timely fashion. And in some cases, schools used non-digital learning in terms of sending out packets of paper-based materials and the like to school students to help them to learn while they were safely at home and avoiding the virus. What's happened since then is that subsequent COVID-19 policies have added another layer of exclusion, unfortunately, to some marginalized people. So, for example, in the latter part of 2021, New Zealand mandated use of the so-called vaccine pass for the use of certain facilities, including public facilities like libraries, many businesses, including retail and hospitality businesses, cafes and the like, also had a mandatory requirement for people to show that pass. So if you've had your vaccine and you have a smartphone, then you will be fine. You will simply show that vaccine pass on your smartphone in order to be admitted to the facility, the cafe or the library. But if you've had your shots and you don't have a smartphone available, or your smartphone is not charged, or you don't have Wi-Fi available to download your pass, or you have a phone with a broken screen, those are all examples of where the technology may let you down. And you may be excluded, perhaps inadvertently, from the system that is designed to protect us all. So while the vaccine pass system has worked well on the whole, it has meant another layer of exclusion for some New Zealanders, typically those who don't have devices, who don't have access to power to charge their devices, who may not have the skills or the ability to download the vaccine pass software. And so that's a layer of exclusion, which was not intentional, but it has made some vulnerable people further marginalized, unfortunately. However, there are positive signs, and there are many good things that are happening in New Zealand. One example here, which is from my friends at the Digital Equity Coalition of Aotearoa, is an example of Steve, who's an older gentleman who lived with his mother for a long time. He's worked his whole life, but had never been interested in the internet, had never been interested in having a smartphone, didn't have an email address, and really didn't interact with the online world at all. Unfortunately, his mother passed away some years ago, and more recently, he's been forced to look after that aspect of his life for himself. In wanting to get a power bill so that he could pay his electricity, he's needed an email address. In getting an email address, he's needed to have a mechanism to interact with these emails. So he's needed to get himself a smartphone. and he's gone on to some free training courses that have been available here in New Zealand. Now, rather than stopping there, Steve's story, and there are many others, even as an older person in New Zealand, he's then found that the online world actually is interesting and that social media can offer him great connections with his community. He's learnt to use online streamed entertainment and TV. And he now finds that the online world is now part of his life. And so there are many stories like that out there, which is certainly positive. New Zealand has many positive individual initiatives happening here, and I'll just go through some very quick examples. This example from Te Whare Wanganui a Awaianui a Rangi is a training initiative for primary school age students who are looking to engage with the technology world and to do it from a Maori perspective, from an Indigenous perspective. So courses are delivered in the Te Reo Maori language, and they offer practical hands-on learning, including technology courses such as robotics, and they take a Maori-centric worldview, which is really important for engagement of that group of people. Another example is Recycle a Device, which is a fantastic scheme which is helping students to learn about devices and how to reuse them, how to clean them, how to make them ready for resale, and then makes them available to communities that need them most. That's now scaling towards a national program. Finally, the Digital Equity Community Coalition Aotearoa, which I've been a part of in the past, is a non-governmental program which is aiming to bring together as many people as we can find who are interested in this topic, to bring them together, to help them work with one another, to help them engage with government, and to help us to learn and to grow the solutions that are available to our community in this whole space. So where to next? At the moment, the government is telling us that it is working on a government digital strategy, and we expect to see that later in the year. I hope that that will include a comprehensive response to the evident digital inequity that we have in New Zealand. And thanks to COVID-19, I think it's very clear that we are well overdue for a comprehensive response to how the healthcare system responds online, how it works with our communities, and how it uses technology. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi nui kia katoa. I will hand you back to Claire. Thank you.
Kia ora, Rowan, thank you. Our second speaker is Jayesh Ranjan, who's a member of the Administrative Service working in the state of Telangana as the Principal Secretary of the Industries and Commerce and Information Technology departments. He develops policy frameworks, attracts new investments, identifies opportunities of utilizing IT in various government processes, and promotes digital empowerment of citizens. Recent assignments include in the Industries Department, Tourism Promotion Department, Hyderabad Urban Development Authority, and various rural assignments for over 12 years in diverse sectors like tribal development, natural resources management, poverty alleviation, and other related social development sectors. He was awarded World Bank's Social Capital Visiting Scholarship in 2002 and the British government's Gurukul Chevening Scholarship in 2005. He's done international consultancy assignments for the World Bank, UN ESCAP, SEDATU Project of Mexico, and for international NGOs working for youth issues like Yes Inc. of the USA and NMC from Italy. He is part of the national pool of trainers and leadership constituted by the Government of India and is involved in training and mentoring newly recruited civil servants. Over to you, Jayesh.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thanks for setting the context, and also it was very informative and educative to listen to the New Zealand experience shared by Rohan. For us in the government here in India, digital divide has been a long pressing challenge, which became much more aggravated during the last 2 years. And the real impact, the real severity of this divide was felt when it came to home-based education, home-based schooling. But other than that as well, the digital divide has been a very significant concern for all of us in the government. I'll speak about my province of Telangana. As Claire mentioned, I represent the government in the southern province of Telangana. There are 28 provinces in our country, and there are about 7 or 8 of us, 7 or 8 provinces who have done exceedingly well in creating very progressive, bringing all the stakeholders together. And I'm proud to share that we are counted as amongst the most progressive and a state which has adopted technology in literally every walk of our governmental activities. But as I said, digital divide is a phenomena that we encounter repeatedly. So the experiences of countering this are in some ways quite similar to the Kiwi experience that Rohan shared. In India, there is a flagship program which is called Digital India, which was introduced 7 years ago. And provinces have been permitted to design their own variations of this Digital India. So we in our state of Telangana have developed a framework which is called Digital Telangana, which in some ways is much more ambitious and much more audacious than the goals of Digital India as well. And one of the goals of ours, which relates to digital infrastructure, is far more ambitious than what has been provided in Digital India. So digital divide, obviously, if one has to look at it in a very comprehensive way, has two sides to it. One is digital infrastructure, the digital supply, and then how do you create demand for that infrastructure? So I'll speak about both of these aspects briefly. Now, when it comes to digital infrastructure, as I mentioned, Digital India has a national mandate of providing optic fiber cable to all the villages in our country. See, the internet penetration, the access to digital divide is increasing in the country, but it still is roughly around 40%. So it implies that 60% of the people do not have access to the internet or to the digital world. And obviously, most of them, a majority of them, are living in rural areas and remote areas. India is a vast country, as all of us know. So digital infrastructure's planning has been done very differently in our state of Telangana. While the national government mandates that the village should be connected, a center point in the village should be connected, and thereafter using Wi-Fi or Li-Fi or some other way, you provide individual connections. But in our state, we have decided to connect each and every home with a reliable high quality optic fiber cable. And the population of our state is about 40 million. There are roughly around 8.5 million households. So providing internet connectivity to 8.5 million households is quite a large task. And in the normal course, we had anticipated to complete this exercise by the end of 2023. But when we looked at the experiences during the pandemic and recognized the necessity that digital connectivity is very, very important if no one has to be left behind, we have decided to advance our goals. And now, hopefully by the end of this year itself, by 2022 itself, we will be able to provide optic fiber connectivity to every home in the state, which will be a tremendous achievement. And one of the ways in which we are able to achieve this, and the reason why we feel so confident about achieving it and maintaining the timeline, is that we have made use of another innovative government program which provides for water pipeline connectivity to every home. See, this some of you may find this to be strange, but in India, every household is still not connected with a piped water supply or a tap water supply. In fact, in the villages, it is pretty common for every villager to gather at a common standpoint and then get your water and bring it back to your home. So we are changing that in our state and ensuring that every home is connected with piped water supply. And to do that, we had to trench almost 150,000 kilometers. And we made innovative use of that trench by putting the optic fiber line cables also in that. Because if this was to be done as a separate standalone project, almost 60 to 70% of the cost would have gone in just for digging those trenches and then filling them back. So in an innovative way, we were able to piggyback on another scheme and deliver optic fiber cables right till the household. So as I said, by the end of 2022, we are confident that we will cover all the 8.5 million households. So this is a very important supply arrangement, but we are not waiting for this optic fiber cable alone to provide internet connectivity to the villagers. We are also encouraging the telecom players to roll out their 4G telecom lines and again, by providing easy right of way, helping them with various other kind of approvals and permissions. We are one of the state where all the major telecom players have been able to cover more than 90% of the state through their 4G lines. We also, in big cities like our capital city of Hyderabad, we have a public Wi-Fi program. We have identified about 3,000 hotspots, places where people gather in large numbers. These are, for instance, shopping malls or cinema theaters or restaurants or bus stations or places of tourism, tourist interest. And 3,000 such places, we have provided free public Wi-Fi for people so that they can remain connected. And but one very important thing is that while we plan for the infrastructure, we deliver infrastructure, we fast track it, we spend lots of resources in creating infrastructure. How do you make people optimally use that infrastructure? In a country like India, that is an even bigger responsibility. And there are umpteen examples to tell us that this is a responsibility which we need to take very, very seriously. The typical scenario in a village is that, let us say, there is a villager, he's an ordinary villager, he's a small farmer, he has limited means. Let us say he went to sleep tonight, and when he woke up in the morning, someone tells him that, hey, there is optic fiber cable right at your doorstep. Now, he's not going to jump up in joy and start rushing to the market and buy a smartphone or a tab or invest in a laptop. I mean, 99% of the people will not do this. In fact, for 99% of them, the importance of having an optic fiber cable right at your doorstep will not even register. They won't even value what has been provided for. So it is an equally important process to make them recognize the value of internet. What can internet do for you? So in our government, we are providing two very important interventions to ensure that we receive the buy-in from the most common person in the village about digital connectivity. So first is that in all the villages where we are able to provide this optic fiber connectivity through underground cables, we are setting up a assistive booth, which is called the Digital Telangana Centers. So every village where connectivity goes, we first set up a booth which has all the required instruments, hardware, and we select a woman from within the community who runs that center. So it is an entrepreneurial model. A woman is selected to run that center, and the woman assists people. Let us say someone has to make a utility payment, or someone has to download some certificate, or someone just has to browse the internet for some information. So this facility, this assistive facility is available for everyone, a common facility for them to make use of digital. And gradually, when people recognize that, okay, whatever is being provided in the common facility can also be done at home, sitting at home with your device, gradually people start shifting from that facility to using their own devices in their own homes. But we have recognized that something more needs to be done. Just browsing the internet or paying your electricity bills or power bills or water bills is not sufficient. I mean, the internet has the potential to do much more than just helping you pay your bills, etc. So what we have started focusing on, again, in the last 4 or 5 years or so, is to find out the most pressing pain points of the common citizen and see how a technology-enabled solution can be provided and make that solution work right in front of their eyes. And if you can do that, we have seen it happening in umpteen cases. If you can do that successfully, the belief in technology, the buy-in, because typically the mentality of a very ordinary common person in the villages, that technology is not for us. It is for people who live in big cities, who speak English, who are well off, who can afford devices. Only they can benefit from technology. So there is a mindset divide as well, much more than digital divide. There's a divide of mindsets that are going to benefit from technology. So in Telangana, just to give an example, and I'm happy to share that we are partnering with UNDP also in that domain. We have decided to focus on agriculture. Agriculture is one major supporter of rural livelihoods in our state. And a large portion of the people who live in the villages rely on agriculture in some way or the other. So we have decided to use technology to solve all the pressing problems, all the pain points, and show to people that this is how we use technology, and this is how your pain point has got alleviated. This is how your incomes have improved. And once we have been able to do that over a couple of seasons, agriculture seasons, that is, the belief in technology, the belief that, yeah, this is something worth investing, worth supporting, becomes very, very kind of pronounced. And so, as I said, while providing digital infrastructure is important, but how to make people value it, make people use it, how to get their buy-in is equally important. And that is the key message I would like to share with all of you today.
Thanks so much, Jayesh. Our third and final presenter, Larry Moore, has proven knowledge of how to deliver market-changing innovation. Arriving in New Zealand in 2005, he led the launch of the country's first 3G service for Vodafone, followed by the first ADSL 2+ service for Orcon. He launched a challenger mobile brand, 2 Degrees, in 2009, gaining a 25% market share in under 3 years. His career spans global, regional, and country management for GlaxoSmithKline, Fujitsu, Vodafone, Orcon, and 2 Degrees. Since 2018, he's been the Network for Learning, or N4L, CEO. N4L is the Crown-owned technology company providing internet, cybersecurity, and information security services to all state schools on behalf of the Ministry of Education. The N4L vision is to empower all teachers and students to teach and learn safely online. Over to you, Larry.
Larry, I think you can start your slides. I'll try to, get the video in order.
You're on mute, Larry.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou. Hello, everybody. My name is Larry Moore. Thank you, Claire, for that warm introduction. And Rohan and Jayesh, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Although we live in the same country, Rohan, we haven't had the opportunity to meet just yet, but I look forward to that. Today, I was sort of really going to talk about what we've been doing specifically around education. So my story is around what we've done here in New Zealand on how to connect and protect learners online. And if we could just get the presentation up, we can go. Would you like me to do it from my end?
Yes, I think you can go ahead, Larry. I'm not able to access your slides.
No problem at all. All good. So in 2018, the New Zealand government published what was called the New Zealand Government's Digital Inclusion Blueprint. And at that time, they identified that 4 elements needed to be present in order to overcome the issue of exclusion. And they are basically access, motivation, skills, and finally trust. M4L operates in the education space, as Clara has shared. So what we were asked to do by the New Zealand government was to specifically focus on New Zealand learners. We're talking here about primary students, secondary students, and helping them to access the internet when they were beyond the school gates. So access the internet both safely and securely. So we were asked to investigate technologies that might be able to afford the opportunity to do that. Why did they ask us? Well, first of all, a little bit of background on M4L. We're a government-owned technology company. We've been operating now for a decade. We provide internet connectivity to schools. We provide cybersecurity to schools and information security to schools. We work on behalf of the Ministry of Education, like a managed service provider would, delivering services to their schools on their behalf. So we've, like I say, been doing this for 10 years to all 2,500 schools, 800,000 students, 50,000 teachers, 250,000 events per second. Perhaps the most important statistic, though, is, and this surprises me, is we are responsible for 1/4 of the country's daytime internet traffic, which is quite staggering when you think about it. It's one sector of the economy. Just shows how popular digital technology is within education. As I say, this is what we do inside of schools, and what we were asked to look at is what could we do to help the people, help the learners that were disconnected beyond the school gates. And it's a significant number. It's surprisingly 1 in 5 students in New Zealand cannot actually access the internet at home. And what we know is obviously that learning doesn't stop when you leave the school gate. So what this means is 1 in 5 students in New Zealand are disadvantaged today because they cannot continue their learning at home over the internet with education appropriate device. So the New Zealand government's goal and the ministry's goal is, how do you close this divide? How do you do it quickly, affordably, and sustainably? So this is the challenge that was in front of us. So what we did is we piloted a number of internet technologies, and I'll share a video with you in a moment that will touch on those. One was about over mobile, one was about over fiber. And then we also discovered that there was still a remaining gap, which is when a child is not using any of those services we provide, but might be using their device in, say, for example, an internet cafe, a library, a church, or somewhere else. So how did we actually support those people to connect safely online? So I shared the videos with you. My apologies in advance if you're unable to hear the voiceover, but the videos will be available afterwards for your viewing pleasure. Cool. So just very briefly, in the video there, we saw two examples of technology. One was about how do you connect learners safely over a mobile internet, over a mobile network, and the second one was how do you connect learners safely over a fiber network. What we really were at pains to do was not reinvent the wheel. We were at pains to really use existing technology in the market. So it was basically easy for us to work with our partners here in New Zealand to take what was already available in the market and repurpose it for our uses. So what we did was, some of you may be familiar with the whole idea of hotspots or Wi-Fi hotspots, where you can connect a number of devices, in this case, student devices, up to 8 devices, to a single hotspot in the home. And within the hotspot, there's a SIM, and basically the SIM talks to the mobile network. and the mobile network directs all of the traffic to our data center, which is located in Auckland or Christchurch, before it goes out to the internet. And what that means is we will be able to provide access to the internet to up to 8 students in a home. We were able to filter all of the internet, so all of the, shall we say, the bad things that you find on the internet, they were not able to access them. And we also prevented all of the security risks as well. Importantly as well, when we're talking about a lot of people who are digitally divided, we're not talking about people that perhaps live in homes, middle-class people who can afford to live in nice homes and can afford the internet. We're talking about people that are maybe living in 2 places at once. Maybe they're living with parents who are separated. Maybe they're spending time with whānau, their family, after school because their parents are working. And importantly, in this instance, the internet connection traveled with them. So wherever the student was, they were able to connect to the internet safely and securely. And that gave, we found that gave the parents and their whānau real peace of mind that their children and their tamariki would continue to learn safely online. The second example was the fiber and central filtering. And what we did here was we reticulated the fiber into the homes, and we basically provided an access point and the device connected to the access point, much in the same way that a retail customer, as I'd like to call them, would do if they were paying for the service. But again, what happened here is the connection was routed back through the M4L firewall and out to the internet. So again, we were providing that experience, that security and that safety. The challenge here, though, is what we found very quickly is because the students were moving around, as I mentioned earlier, from one place to another, when they left the home of perhaps one parent where we'd received a connection, they were disconnected as soon as they went to another parent. It was less effective in terms of providing that ubiquitous coverage and that opportunity for children to learn online, no matter where they are. We also recognise at this point that there was a situation where students were not at home, but perhaps they were at their local church, their local library, the local McDonald's. There's a lot of hotspots in our fast food restaurants here in New Zealand. So what we wanted to do there was to make sure that parents could be comfortable, that their child could continue their learning outside of the home, but could receive the benefit of free internet like you may get in a cafe, but also they get the benefit of having the safety and security on their device. So what we did is we created a device-based filter, and we gave that free to everybody in New Zealand. So today, you can actually download a filter onto your device, connect safely to the internet, and all of the bad stuff that you perhaps don't want to see, you can't see it. And all of the bad guys on the internet can't see you either. So I'll just share a short video of that particular product and service as well. So there are 3 examples, one about how do you connect people safely and securely over an internet, so over a mobile network. The second being how do you connect them over a fiber network. And then if you are traveling around with your device and you want to ensure that the filtering is traveling with you, then to actually install the filter onto the device, the learning device itself. As I mentioned, it works across any network, fixed and mobile, all operating system, blocks the worst of the webs. And if you're familiar with how to set up a mobile phone using a prepaid SIM or something similar, then you would be more than capable of setting up this filter on your device. So before I hand back to Claire, where did this leave us at the end of all of the piloting? Is it left us feeling confident that we could provide safe and secure access to all learners, no matter what network they're connected to, but also we could provide filtering on their devices as well. And I guess the next step really is building a launch business case and an investment plan to roll these technologies out to, like I say, 1 in 5 learners in New Zealand today cannot connect to the internet beyond the school gate. So there's a big need there, and I look forward to supporting the government to address that need. So I'll hand back to you, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Larry, and thank you to Jayesh and Rowan as well. All quite different presentations, but raising a whole lot of questions and issues, and also some solutions. I'm going to move straight into the panel discussion because we don't have a lot of time for that, and there are some good questions coming in. And I'm going to take one from the Q&A, which basically goes to the heart of things, really. The question is, for digital inclusion, while access and adoption is critical, affordability still remains a challenge in many countries. Would like to get the panel's view on this and some practical examples of how this can be addressed. Thanks. So who wants to go first?
I can, if you want, Claire.
Yeah, sure.
I think in terms of, we came across the affordability issue when we were working with Rata Street down in Wellington. And it wasn't, something that was going to be addressed by one party, if you like. So the government leaned into the problem, but the local community did as well as parents. So it was really about how do you make it possible for people not to buy things outright, but how do you make it possible for them to perhaps make a contribution? So maybe the government makes a contribution, maybe some philanthropic people make some contribution, and maybe parents make some contribution as well. And we found that was an effective way to overcome the issue of cost. So that was one example.
Jayesh, have you got any comment on that?
Yeah, a couple of comments, Claire. So one is that the reality about India is that a large majority of people are accessing the digital world through their mobile phones. And the cost of these phones are actually becoming cheaper and cheaper. Now, even a very basic smartphone, which can perform all the required functions of browsing, etc., is available at, let us say, about 20,000 rupees, which is not very difficult to afford. The second is that many state governments are actually distributing laptops and other computing devices to children, school students. This is as a part of catching them young, ensuring that from a school age itself, they become digitally literate, etc. So that is another initiative which has been rolled out by different states. The third is, at least for Telangana, which I can speak about, is that even if you visit the most poor households, you will find that they own a television. Television is ubiquitous. Every home, regardless of their income status, have access to a television. So the Digital Telangana program that we are rolling out, we have the intention of converting these televisions into smart televisions. So you don't have to buy or invest in a separate laptop or a monitor. Your television itself can function as a computing device. So it's not that big a challenge which cannot be overcome, in my opinion.
Rowan?
Yes, just to chip in there very briefly, the non-government organisation that I'm part of, which is called LifeWise, we provide services to the homeless and other communities, many of whom struggle with digital connectivity. A little bit like what Jayesh was just saying, we found that the cost of some smartphones now is so cheap that it is actually a good idea for us to simply give our client a smartphone. The cheap ones which are running Android can be purchased for as little as $65 New Zealand dollars or 45 US dollars roughly. And you do have to make sure that they're connected and that they have access to Wi-Fi and so on. But the device itself is, the prices of them have come down a lot. So that's certainly very helpful. It's not that everything can be done on a smartphone. Certainly some of the e-government services won't work too well on a smartphone. You couldn't write a high school essay on a smartphone, but it's a very good step in the right direction, and the price is fairly affordable. So that's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah,
Claire, I did hear of one very good example from a colleague in Australia, where I'm sure people are familiar with the whole notion of unlimited data on their home broadband or on their mobile phone. Well, that's not the case in every part of the world, and it's certainly not the case in Australia. And what they've been looking at is how do they work with the major telcos in Australia so that when a paying customer does not use all of the data that they have per month. So for example, if somebody buys 100 gigs and they only use 80 gigabytes, is that the telecommunication network bills that customer for 100 gigs anyway, but they donate the 20 gigs to a fund, and the data then gets shared with the people who unfortunately can't afford to pay for it. And I thought that was a really good idea because the telcos are paid for it up front by a billed customer, but then they share that data out through a third party. And I won't bore you with the terminology, the telco language, but I thought that was a really clever example of how you get some people to, if you like, gift their data to somebody that perhaps can't afford it. Very smart.
Yeah, look, this seems like a bit of a self-evident question, but it goes to the heart of one of the 4 elements that you've mentioned, Larry, in the digital inclusion plan that looks at those 4 key elements for digital inclusion being motivation, access, skills, and trust. And I guess the question is, how important is the involvement of civil society or the non-government sector, not-for-profits, etc., community sector, in working to close the digital divide? And does that go to the issue of trust? I mean, Jayesh talked about the man who, who might wake up one morning and discover that he's got connectivity, but why does he need it? And also, there is an issue around, trust about, new things, but also about what might be done with your data, with your information, etc. So I'd be interested to hear what people have got to say about that.
Shall I go last?
Or you? Well, how about Rowan? You go first.
Okay, I'll give it a go, Claire. Thank you. I think you're exactly on the right track. I think as internet adoption increases, you're looking at a smaller and smaller proportion of people who are not connected. And those people are more likely to be those who don't have a level of trust in government. So who do they? And they don't necessarily trust big corporations that they don't know or understand either. So who do they trust? They trust their local community. If they're a Maori community here in New Zealand, they trust their iwi. They may well trust charities or their school. So those sorts of sort of intermediary organisations are the ones who I think can provide the training. They may be able to provide the devices and the plans. And that's certainly something that we've worked with in a number of organisations that I've been part of. I think it's a really, really good way to reach people where they are and to offer them the help that they need.
Jayesh?
Yeah, Claire. So I also agree that there are serious trust and credibility issues. But when I presented earlier, I spoke about how we have engaged a person from the local community, a woman that too, who actually guides the community in what all opportunities are there for digital. So that model has worked even better. So while NGOs and civil society organizations can definitely intermediate, but the best, in my opinion, is to empower the communities directly, and they take control of how digital awareness, digital literacy, digital opportunities can be best utilized. So a level deeper than NGOs and CSOs is to find a community activist from amongst the community, train them, build their capacities, and then help them run the show locally.
Yeah. Larry, do you want to add anything?
Just echo that. I think you have to you have to build the digital understanding of the community. So, for example, Pacifica peoples, Maori, and others, you have to build the whole community understanding. You have to build their confidence. It's not as simple as going to the young person, in my case, or to their parents. Often in Pacifica communities, as we know, it's often the elders that make the decisions. So you have to take a community approach. Otherwise, you just will not get take up of the service as you'd intended. So it's complicated, but I think you have to take a whole of community approach.
Someone in the chat has said that some reports said that e-learning is not effective, and any idea about this and how to improve?
Contentious subject. I've heard people say it's not effective and it is effective. I think it comes down to a number of things. We have examples here in New Zealand, which we're happy to share with Manaya Kalani, where we have examples of, effective e-learning. But I think it's not as simple as putting content online and making the device available, making the internet available. There's a lot of it to do with making sure that the teachers themselves and the parents are happy to provide, they have the skills and are able to support the online learning. It's again complex. So I'm not surprised to hear that some people think it's ineffective, and I've heard other people say it's effective. I guess it depends, is what I'm saying, on a number of things.
Yeah, Jayesh, I don't know how what your view would be on this, but I mean, there's no doubt that urgency is a factor in closing the digital divides, and it sounds, from what you've said, that you've really taken that on board in your area, and that you're bringing forward programs, and that's exciting. Considering effective and lasting change requires consideration of the upstream effects. For instance, and we're talking quite a bit about schools, but it is quite a pressing issue. Access to devices for school students can't just be solved by a one-size-fits-all models. For instance, in a few years, that things, if people have been given a device to get them on board, then in a few years they need replacing, and it's about the strategy for making sure that happens so that it doesn't, come unstuck. Is that something that you've been thinking about addressing in a wider sense as well, not just with schools?
Yeah, so I'll stick to the example of schools, and I'll also integrate the earlier question, Claire, that Larry responded to, about the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of digital learning or e-learning. So I would say that all of us are still on a learning curve. The last 2 years came in a very sudden way. The developments were very sudden for us, and the responses were kind of done in a firefighting mode, because schools had to be shut, but you can't deprive students of teaching learning opportunities, and therefore home-based education was instituted. Many reasons why people find it ineffective is also because of the lack of inclusion. Many households did not have sufficient number of gadgets, or did not have proper connectivity, bandwidth, etc. And therefore, they could not really benefit from all these interventions. And therefore, it was as good as not going to school at all, not learning anything at all during these 2 years. But gradually, people have started to figure out these solutions. So there are solutions of how do you provide home-based learning in a remote location, also in a low bandwidth location also. How do teachers form work groups, and then they use simple communication tools like a WhatsApp to communicate lessons, to support or supplement whatever has been taught online through work-based exercises, and so on and so forth. So the learning curve is quite steep. And now, I guess after 2 years, and in India, for instance, schools have been reopened quite a while ago. Since last 8 to 9 months, schooling has resumed back to normal. The final conclusion, I mean, I won't say final, but a kind of a very strong conclusion appears to be that there is no replacement for face-to-face learning, because students pick so many other learning inputs as well in the classroom, besides what the teacher is directing them to. But digital tools are equally effective if the student wants to enrich his classroom learning by accessing the larger content which is provided by going. Some of the children are much more precautious. They have abilities beyond their age also, and their learning can be fast-tracked. And now that access problems, affordability problems are more or less getting solved, there is all the merit in supplementing regular school-based learning with digital learning. So I guess this is the model which is going to remain, and in many other spheres also. Eventually, I guess this is a template that we adopt.
Time for a final comment from either of Larry or Rowan, if you want to.
I'll have a go if you like, Claire. There's been a few questions in the chat around access and affordability and adoption. I think the way I look at those sorts of puzzles is that access is necessary and it's not sufficient. So if you don't have access, then having an adoption program or a skills program or an affordability program is not really going to work. So there are places where you do need an access solution, and I think that's sort of where the priority should go. And here in New Zealand, we're still investing in connecting Marae, which is the Maori community houses. We're investing in rural broadband because we have those access gaps. But then the more of those you fill in, you can then move to the next stage of if you like, of the solution, which is around your adoption programs and looking at affordability and skills and trust. I think that's the right sequence to do things.
I've just had one thing, Claire. I think our experience is do it with people, not to people. So start with the community, start with burnout, start with parents and learners and the schools themselves in case of education. Because the things that are actually simple are the technology. It's how do you build the motivation to use it, the skills to be able to use it, and the trust and confidence. Yeah, do it with them, not to them, would be my advice.
Great. So look, I think we've reached the end of the webinar. It's been a really good discussion. It's I think raised a whole lot of issues, but I think the things that stand out for me is that there's quite a lot of hope, and in terms of the deep thinking that is being done in countries around how to try to solve these issues, but how to bring forward initiatives to ensure that that more and more people can get connected, and to do it in a way that is more resilient and sustainable, which I think is, what we all need. I think Jayesh also mentioned, and it's important that we do take that on board, that face-to-face is you can't beat face-to-face, whether interactions, but in these times, the whole digital transformation project has become much more important and significant for countries to move forward on. So I just want to thank you all for coming to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for your great questions, and panelists Rowan Mcmahon, Jayesh Ranjan and Larry Moore. Really, really thoughtful, interesting presentations. And of course, last but hey, for all the background work and support. So I hope you've found it useful in helping you progress your own discussions in how to close the digital divide. So Afreen, I'll hand back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Claire, and thanks a lot, Jayesh, Rohan, and Larry. For all the colleagues, we'll be sharing the presentations as well as the videos. Apologies for the audibility issues, but at the same time, we'll also try to roll out the questions to the panelists once again to see if they have additional responses, because I've been receiving chat messages from colleagues trying to being more curious about some of the questions that were in the Q&A. So we'll try to roll over to the panelists. We'll come back to you with the responses, and stay tuned for more learning sessions. Thank you so much for attending. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.